Maggie Miller had always been the dependable one. As the eldest child in a small suburban family, she was the one who volunteered to babysit when their parents worked late. She tutored Emily through high school math, even when it meant staying up past midnight to finish her own assignments. While Emily partied through college, Maggie took on part-time jobs, saving every cent she earned. And when their parents retired early, she was the one who stepped in, helping pay off the mortgage so they wouldn't lose the family home. By the time she turned 32, Maggie's relentless drive had turned her into one of New York's most sought-after event planners. The parties she organized were legendary: glitzy fundraisers, glamorous corporate galas, weddings straight out of fairy tales. What no one knew, not her clients, not her colleagues, not even her family, was that Maggie had quietly purchased the Grand Horizon, a stunning estate in the Hudson Valley that had become one of the premier wedding destinations in the area. To the outside world, she was simply the planner who made dreams come true, but behind the scenes, she owned the whole operation. Maggie hadn't shared her success with her family. She'd learned long ago that boasting about her accomplishments led to more resentment than pride. Her mother would dismiss her as lucky, as if Maggie hadn't worked herself to exhaustion to get where she was. Her father would brush off her achievements with a shrug, muttering that it wasn't as though she was curing cancer. And Emily, her younger sister, would simply roll her eyes, sighing loudly about how Maggie was always trying to be the star of the family. So Maggie stopped telling them. She built her empire in silence, turning the Grand Horizon into a thriving business while her family went on assuming she was just a talented freelancer scraping by. It worked, until one fateful Monday afternoon when her cell phone buzzed on her desk. It was Emily. Maggie stared at the screen for a moment before picking up. "Hey," she said, keeping her voice neutral. "You don't need it anyway." Emily's laughter crackled through the line. There was that familiar tone of condescension, thick as honey. "I mean, I'm getting married and you're still single. At least the money will go towards something meaningful." "What are you talking about, Emily?" Maggie's grip on her phone tightened. "I just wanted to let you know. I'm having my wedding at the Grand Horizon. It's going to be absolutely perfect. I already took care of the deposit. No need to worry." Maggie's mind raced. She hadn't seen any new high-profile bookings come through under her sister's name. "What deposit?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Oh, the one I made using your savings," Emily replied breezily. "You had that account just sitting there, and I figured, why not use it for something wonderful? Weddings are expensive, Maggie's stomach dropped. She turned to her computer, quickly logging into her online banking. Her heart sank as she saw the transactions, several large withdrawals over the past week, totaling $100,000. She had been saving that money for years, building a safety net in case the Grand Horizon ever hit a slow season. Emily's voice continued to chirp on the other end of the line, talking about the floral arrangements, the champagne fountains, the imported linens. Maggie barely registered the words. Her hands trembled as she refreshed her bank page, confirming that the balance was nearly gone. Emily's laughter broke through her daze. "Honestly, Maggie, it's not a big deal. I mean, you're doing fine, right? This is my big day. It's going to be the wedding of the year." Maggie closed her eyes, steadying her breathing. She wanted to scream, to call Emily out on her selfishness, to demand the money back. But years of experience had taught her that yelling at Emily would only lead to more smug retorts, and her parents stepping in to defend their golden child. "No," Maggie had to think carefully. "Enjoy your day, Emily," she said evenly, her voice calm and composed. "Oh, I will," Emily replied, oblivious to the storm brewing on Maggie's end of the line. "Thanks for being so understanding. I knew you'd come through for me." But Maggie hung up, her hand trembling as she set the phone down on her mahogany desk. The irony wasn't lost on her. Emily had drained her account to pay for a venue that Maggie owned. The only saving grace was that Emily had no idea the Grand Horizon belonged to her sister. A slow smile spread across Maggie's face. Emily thought she had won, that she had once again taken something from Maggie without consequence. But this time, Maggie wasn't going to let it slide. She turned to the large window behind her desk, the afternoon sunlight streaming in and illuminating the polished wood floor. Her reflection stared back at her, a glint of determination in her eyes. This wasn't just about the money. It was about years of being undervalued, overlooked, and taken advantage of. Emily had no idea who she was dealing with. After hanging up the phone, Maggie sat in silence for a moment. The shock of what Emily had done was beginning to wear off, replaced by a simmering anger that coursed through her veins. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the awards and plaques on her office wall, silent reminders of everything she had achieved without any help from her family. Her fingers drummed rhythmically on the desk as a plan began to form in her mind. Maggie knew she needed to talk to Sarah, her most trusted ally. If there was anyone who could help her pull this off, it was Sarah. A quick text later, Sarah was on her way to Maggie's office. When she arrived, Maggie didn't waste any time. "Emily drained my savings," Maggie began, her voice steady. "Every penny." Sarah's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? How? Does she even have access to your account?" "She does now, apparently," Maggie replied, her tone laced with bitterness, "and she used it to pay the deposit for the Grand Horizon." Sarah sat down in the chair opposite Maggie, crossing her arms. "She's planning her wedding here? Using your money?" "Exactly. She doesn't even know I own the place," Maggie said, a small, mirthless smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "But I'm not just going to let her get away with it. I want her to think everything is going smoothly. I want her to keep piling on the extravagance until she's so deep in debt she can't see straight. And then—" Maggie paused, her smile widening. "I'll pull the rug out from under her." Sarah nodded slowly, a mischievous grin spreading across her face. "I like where this is going. What's the plan?" Maggie reached for a file folder on her desk and flipped it open. "Here's what we know so far. The full balance is due 60 days before the event. Emily's wedding is in 90 days. That means she has less than a month to come up with the remaining $50,000. "Which she won't be able to do," Sarah added. "Exactly," Maggie said. "But I want her to think she can. I'll keep everything running smoothly on the surface. She'll keep adding more luxuries, imported flowers, a champagne fountain, custom lighting, and we'll just keep letting her dig her hole deeper. Then, when the final payment comes due—" "We cancel the wedding," Sarah finished. Maggie leaned back, satisfaction evident in her posture. "And when it all falls apart, she'll finally have to face the consequences of her actions. No more golden child treatment. No more getting everything handed to her. She'll have to deal with reality for the first time in her life." Sarah leaned forward. "Do you think she'll suspect anything?" "No," Maggie said firmly. "She's so caught up in herself, she can't see past the end of her own nose. As far as she knows, I'm just her older sister, the one who always helps clean up her messes. She won't see this coming." The next day, Maggie put the first phase of her plan into motion. She made a point of avoiding her family's calls, only responding to texts in the briefest possible way. When her father finally managed to reach her, his voice was a mixture of guilt and exasperation. "Maggie," he began, "your mother and I have been talking, and we think you should help Emily with the wedding planning. It's the least you can do, considering she's your sister." Maggie suppressed a laugh. "Of course, Dad. I'd be happy to help. Just let me know what she needs." Her father sighed, clearly relieved. "Thank you, Maggie. I knew you'd understand. Emily is just starting out, you know, and she needs the support. You've always been the dependable one." "That's me?" Maggie replied, her tone light and agreeable. "Always dependable." After hanging up, Maggie shared the conversation with Sarah. "It's almost funny," she said. "They think I'm just going to roll over and let her do whatever she wants." Sarah smirked. "They have no idea what's coming." As the days passed, Emily's demands grew increasingly extravagant. She wanted an 8-tier cake flown in from Paris. She requested custom linens embroidered with her initials. She asked for a live quartet to perform during dinner and a DJ to play the after-party. Every request was more absurd than the last, and Maggie approved them all. "Are you sure you want to keep letting her add things?" Sarah asked one afternoon as they reviewed the ever-growing list of expenses. "Absolutely," Maggie said. "The more she spends now, the harder it'll hit her later. She thinks she's building her dream wedding, but she's actually building her own downfall." Maggie had always been the responsible one, the one who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to make sure everything ran smoothly. But this time, she wasn't cleaning up someone else's mess. She was creating a carefully orchestrated spectacle, one that would finally make her family see her for who she really was. As the second chapter of Maggie's story unfolded, the pieces began to fall into place. Emily remained blissfully unaware, happily racking up more and more expenses, completely confident that everything would work out in her favor. But Maggie knew better. She was no longer the silent, unappreciated sister. She was the owner of the Grand Horizon, a successful businesswoman who had worked too hard and sacrificed too much to let her sister's entitlement go unchecked. And when the moment came, Maggie would be ready. As the wedding date drew nearer, Emily's demands escalated to absurd heights. The initial plans for a simple, tasteful ceremony quickly ballooned into a spectacle of opulence. Every day brought a new request: custom gold leaf invitations, a fireworks display, a 3-tier chocolate fountain for the dessert bar. Maggie approved every single one without hesitation, knowing full well that each extravagance added another nail to the coffin of Emily's grand plans. Emily, meanwhile, carried on as if the world owed her this perfection. She never questioned how she would afford it all. As far as she was concerned, the family always found a way to give her what she wanted. When her parents expressed concern about the mounting costs, Emily waved them off with a dismissive laugh. "Daddy, don't worry about it," she said during one planning meeting. "Maggie will take care of everything. She always does." Her parents exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing. Over the years, they had grown accustomed to Emily's entitlement. It was easier to let her have her way than to confront the storm that came when she was denied. Maggie, listening in from her office at the Grand Horizon, rolled her eyes. She knew exactly what her family thought. Maggie the reliable, Maggie the problem solver, Maggie who would never let things fall apart. But this time, they were wrong. The first signs of trouble. 2 months before the wedding, Sarah called Maggie into her office to review the latest expenses. "Emily's at it again," Sarah said, pushing a stack of invoices across the desk. "She's now asking for a live elephant at the reception." "A live elephant?" Maggie repeated, blinking. "For ambiance," Sarah confirmed. Maggie couldn't help but laugh. "Well, why not? Let's add it to the list. How much is that going to cost?" $15,000, Sarah replied, plus permits and insurance. "Perfect," Maggie said, signing off on the expense without a second thought. Emily's requests had long since crossed the line into the absurd. She wanted custom chandeliers flown in from Italy, hand-carved ice sculptures, and imported orchids that could only be found in a remote part of Thailand. Maggie allowed every single one, knowing that the final bill would be so astronomical it would make Emily's head spin. But it wasn't just the mounting costs that were causing cracks in the facade. Emily's credit cards had started getting declined one by one. Sarah reported that vendors were quietly reaching out, concerned that payments weren't going through. Maggie instructed them to keep everything running smoothly on the surface, even as the foundation crumbled. "We need her to think everything's fine," Maggie said. "She can't know what's coming. Not yet." Emily's increasing desperation. Emily's carefree attitude began to shift as the wedding date grew closer. The first time a vendor informed her that a payment hadn't gone through, she brushed it off as a glitch. By the second and third time, she started calling her parents in a panic. "Daddy, my card's not working again," Emily said one evening. "I need you to call the bank and fix it." Her father hesitated. "Emily, we've already maxed out the credit line. You need to slow down." "Slow down?" Emily's voice rose. "This is my wedding, my one special day. I can't just cut corners." Maggie overheard this conversation from the next room. She could hear the growing desperation in Emily's voice, the cracks in her unshakable confidence. It was a sound she'd never heard before, and it brought a small smile to her lips. Later that night, Maggie received a call from her father. He sounded tired, his voice heavy with worry. "Maggie," he began, "we're running into some financial difficulties. Emily's expenses are, well, they're more than we anticipated. Do you think you could help out a little more, just until we get things back on track?" Maggie considered her response carefully. "I've already done quite a bit, Dad, but if there's something specific you need, let me know." "Well, Emily mentioned that you could cover some of the additional costs." Maggie cut him off gently. "I'll see what I can do." She hung up, knowing full well that she wouldn't be covering another cent.
Chapter 4.
The final countdown. As the 60-day deadline approached, Maggie watched from the sidelines as her family scrambled to keep up appearances. Emily continued to add more extravagant features to her dream wedding, blissfully ignoring the mounting financial strain. Her parents grew more tense with each passing day, but they never confronted Emily directly. One evening, Sarah walked into Maggie's office, holding a printout of the current budget. "You might want to see this," she said, handing it over. Maggie scanned the document, her eyebrows rising. $175,000? She murmured. "That's impressive." Sarah smirked. "And that doesn't include the elephant, or the fireworks, or the custom monogrammed cocktail napkins." Maggie leaned back in her chair, tapping the edge of the printout against her desk. "It's almost time," she said. "We just need to wait a little longer." Sarah nodded. "What's the plan when the final payment is due?" "We'll see if they can come up with the money," Maggie said. "If not, well, they'll find out what happens when you don't read the fine print." The days crept closer. Emily's excitement was palpable. She spoke of her wedding with a kind of manic glee, convinced it would be the event of the season. She had no idea that the final payment was just days away, or that her carefully constructed fantasy was about to collapse. Maggie watched it all unfold, waiting for the moment when the reality of the situation would finally hit her sister. It was almost time for the house of cards to come crashing down. On the morning of the big meeting at the Grand Horizon, Maggie arrived early, dressed sharply in a navy blazer that projected both authority and calm confidence. She walked the halls of the venue as sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the intricate floral arrangements that Emily had demanded for her wedding. The staff bustled around her, setting up the consultation room with sparkling crystal water glasses, silver trays of macarons, and a selection of premium teas. To Emily, it would look like another step toward her fairy tale wedding. To Maggie, it was the calm before the storm. Sarah met her at the office, holding a clipboard. "Everything's in place. They're scheduled to arrive in 15 minutes, she said. Maggie nodded, her expression impassive. "Perfect. Let's make sure it all runs smoothly until I'm ready." Emily arrived first, flanked by their parents. Her entrance was as dramatic as ever. She swept into the room as though she were royalty, a bright designer scarf draped around her neck and oversized sunglasses perched atop her head. She paused to admire the decor and made a show of running her fingers along the polished walnut conference table. "This is exactly what I imagined," she said, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "I knew this venue would be perfect. Everything here just screams luxury." Their parents exchanged polite nods and murmurs of agreement. Maggie watched through the one-way glass, arms crossed, taking in the scene. She saw her father shift uncomfortably in his chair, his shoulders tense. Her mother's hand fluttered nervously at her side, smoothing the pleats of her blouse. The weight of the impending payment deadline hung over them like a storm cloud, but they said nothing. They never did when it came to Emily. Sarah entered the consultation room carrying a silver tray. "Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Grand Horizon. The venue owner sends her apologies. She's tied up with another engagement, but I'll be assisting you today." Emily's smile faltered for a split second. "Another engagement? I thought we were meeting with the owner." "She's handling an important matter overseas," Sarah said smoothly, setting the tray down. "But rest assured, I have all the details for your event, and we'll finalize everything today." Emily waved it off with a flick of her hand. "Fine, as long as it's handled. I have more important things to focus on, like my dress fitting this afternoon." Maggie smirked, unseen from her vantage point behind the glass. She was impressed by Sarah's poise. It was the perfect setup. Emily, as usual, was oblivious to the tension in the room. She leaned back in her chair and began flipping through a glossy wedding portfolio, circling photos of extravagant centerpieces and ice sculptures. Her parents sat stiffly, their faces growing paler with each extravagant selection. Sarah began her pitch. "For your reception, we have several catering options. Our executive chef can create a custom 7-course menu, including seasonal, locally sourced ingredients. We also offer a premium beverage package with champagne, signature cocktails, and a wine pairing for each course. Emily's eyes lit up. "Oh, I love that. We'll take the premium package, of course." Her father cleared his throat. "Emily, maybe we should consider something a bit more modest." Emily shot him a sharp look. "Daddy, this is my wedding. I don't want modest. I want unforgettable. Isn't that what you and Mom always said? That my big day should be everything I dreamed of?" Her father hesitated. "Yes, but then it's settled," Emily said, cutting him off. "We're going all out." Sarah made a note on her clipboard. "Wonderful. Now, about the floral arrangements. We have an award-winning floral designer who can source rare orchids from Thailand." "Oh, yes, definitely those," Emily interrupted. "And I want the arrangements to be huge, like taller than the guests." Maggie could almost hear her parents' hearts sinking. She saw her mother glance anxiously at her father, but neither of them spoke up. They were letting Emily run the show, just as they always had. When Sarah reached the final page of the portfolio, she cleared her throat delicately. "One last item, the remaining balance." Emily didn't look up from the magazine she was browsing. "Right, the balance. Daddy will take care of it." And her father's eyes widened slightly. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about that." "What's there to talk about?" Emily replied, still not looking up. "It's a done deal. You'll handle it like always." Her father's voice dropped, low and strained. "Emily, the business has been struggling. I'm not sure we'll be able to—" Sarah stepped in gracefully. "I'm so sorry, but as per our policy, the full balance must be paid 60 days before the event. If payment isn't received, we'll have to cancel the reservation and retain the deposit as outlined in the contract." Emily finally looked up, her face a mixture of disbelief and irritation. "Cancel the reservation? You can't be serious." "I assure you, it's our standard policy," Sarah said. "It applies to all our clients." Emily's voice rose, her tone sharp. "But I'm not just any client. Do you know who my family is? My father is—" Sarah didn't flinch. "I understand your concerns, but the policy is firm. We'll need the remaining balance by the deadline, or we'll have to release the date to another client." Emily's jaw clenched. She turned to her father, her eyes narrowing. "Daddy, fix this." He looked down at his hands, avoiding her gaze. "I'll try, sweetheart, but I can't promise—" "I don't want to hear that," Emily snapped. "You're my father. You're supposed to handle things like this. Just make it happen." Maggie watched from behind the glass, her arms still crossed. The cracks in the facade were beginning to show. For the first time, Emily seemed genuinely worried. Her confidence, so steadfast just days ago, was starting to crumble under the weight of reality. Maggie felt a flicker of satisfaction. The moment she had been waiting for was finally approaching. Sarah excused herself from the room, walking briskly back to Maggie's office. She closed the door behind her, leaning against it with a wry smile. "That was intense," she said. Maggie nodded, still watching the family through the one-way glass. "And it's only going to get better." The weeks following the canceled wedding were a whirlwind of tension and unexpected adjustments. For Emily, the fallout hit hard. She had always been the golden child, the one who got what she wanted, when she wanted it. But now, with the dream wedding gone, the money vanished, and her family at their wits' end, she faced something new, the consequences of her actions. Maggie, on the other hand, felt a sense of closure she hadn't experienced in years. While the dramatic showdown had been satisfying, what came afterward was even more rewarding. She watched, quietly, and from a distance as the family dynamics began to shift. Emily's new reality. At first, Emily refused to accept that her wedding was truly off. She called Maggie relentlessly, leaving long, teary voicemails begging for a second chance. "Please, Maggie," one message began. "I'll pay you back. I swear I will. Just let me have the date back. I'll make it work. You can't just let everything fall apart." Maggie never responded. Instead, she let Emily face the silence. Without the venue and the funding, Emily had to confront a harsh new reality. Her parents, finally at their breaking point, refused to bail her out again. "We don't have the money, Emily," her father said during one particularly tense phone call. "And even if we did, you need to learn that we can't always fix everything for you. It's time you figure out how to move forward on your own." For the first time in her life, Emily had to consider getting a job. At first, the idea seemed laughable to her. "Me? Work? What would I even do?" she complained to her mother. But the alternatives, moving into a smaller apartment, selling her designer handbags, or admitting her situation to her friends, were even less appealing. Eventually, she found work at a local cafe. The pay was modest and the shifts were long, but Emily had no choice. She traded in her luxury wardrobe for a simple uniform and learned how to smile through customers' complaints. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work. Maggie's quiet victory. For Maggie, watching Emily navigate this new chapter was more satisfying than any single act of revenge. Each time she walked past the cafe and saw Emily behind the counter, carefully pouring lattes and handing out croissants, she felt a small but profound sense of justice. Sarah often joined her during these quiet moments of reflection. One afternoon, the two sat at a nearby park bench, sipping coffee and observing the bustling cafe through the window. "Do you think she'll stick it out?" Sarah asked, nodding toward Emily, who was adjusting a display of pastries with a determined but weary expression. Maggie shrugged. "Who knows? But the fact that she's even trying is more than I expected." Sarah grinned. "It's poetic in a way. She's finally working for something. Maybe she'll start to understand what you've been dealing with all these years." Maggie let out a quiet laugh. "One can hope." A new role for the parents. Emily wasn't the only one undergoing a transformation. Maggie's parents, long accustomed to enabling Emily's behavior, found themselves at a crossroads. Her father, now free from the financial strain of constantly rescuing Emily, began to focus on rebuilding his business. It was slow, painstaking work, but Maggie occasionally stepped in as a consultant, offering advice and connections to help him get back on his feet. Her mother also underwent a shift. No longer preoccupied with catering to Emily's every whim, she began exploring her own interests. She enrolled in a cooking class, something she had always talked about but never pursued. At first, her attempts were clumsy, and the family teased her about burned cookies and lopsided cakes. But over time, she improved, and cooking became a source of pride for her. Maggie noticed these small changes and felt an unexpected sense of relief. Her family was finally starting to take responsibility for their own lives, and while they still had a long way to go, it was a step in the right direction. A family dinner. Several months after the wedding debacle, Maggie received an invitation to a family dinner. Her father had called her personally, his tone unusually sincere. "We'd love to have you over, Maggie. Just a quiet dinner. No Emily drama, I promise." Maggie hesitated. It had been so long since she'd sat down with them as equals rather than the one who held everything together. But the invitation felt different this time, less like an obligation and more like a genuine attempt to reconnect. When she arrived, the atmosphere was surprisingly warm. Her mother served a homemade meal that, while not perfect, was made with care. Her father shared stories about his slow but steady progress in rebuilding the family business. Even Emily, though quiet, seemed less entitled and more self-aware. She helped clear the table without being asked. A small gesture, but one that spoke volumes. During dessert, her father raised a glass. "To Maggie," he said, his voice steady, "for always being the strong one, and for helping us see that it's never too late to change." Maggie accepted the toast with a soft smile, feeling a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying finally lift. Maggie's new perspective. As the months turned into years, Maggie continued to thrive. Her business expanded, her network grew, and her sense of independence deepened. The Grand Horizon remained a premier venue, and Maggie took pride in the fact that she had built it all on her own. Emily's life didn't transform overnight, but she slowly adjusted to her new reality. She paid back what she owed Maggie, bit by bit, month by month. Each payment was a reminder of the consequences she had faced and a small step toward becoming a more responsible person. Maggie no longer felt the need to be the family's safety net. She had shown them that she was more than just a reliable sister or a dependable daughter. She was someone who could stand up for herself, demand respect, and expect others to carry their own weight. In the end, Maggie found peace not through vengeance, but through change. Her family, flawed as they were, had begun to grow in ways she never thought possible. And Maggie, finally free of the burden of fixing everyone else's problems, could focus on the life she had built for herself, strong, independent, and at last truly her own.